May 1943. A fishing boat off the coast of Huelva, Spain. The water was cold. The body floated face down, dressed in the uniform of a Royal Marines officer. Chained to his wrist, a leather briefcase. Inside, documents marked "Most Secret." German intelligence officers in Madrid received the photographs within hours. They studied every page. Maps, invasion plans, Churchill's handwriting. It was all there. Proof that the Allies would strike Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. They believed it completely. But in one photograph, in the corner of one document, a fragment of coastline appeared. A fragment that did not match the story. And in that fragment, the entire deception began to unravel. In a secured room beneath Whitehall, the architects of Operation Mincemeat waited. The air was thick with cigarette smoke. Maps covered the walls: Sicily, Sardinia, Greece. A single telephone sat silent on the desk. Outside, London endured its fourth year of blackout. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. Beside him, Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley stared at the floor. They had spent months constructing this lie. A corpse, a fictitious identity, forged love letters, fake receipts, theater ticket stubs. Every detail had been perfect. The body, procured from a London mortuary, had been transformed into Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. His briefcase contained letters from one British general to another, outlining invasion plans for targets far from Sicily. The Germans had taken the bait. Intelligence confirmed it. Hitler himself had redeployed entire divisions. They thought they had won. But then, a single telegram arrived from Madrid, and everything changed. For 3 weeks, British intelligence had monitored German communications with near euphoric precision. Intercepted Enigma decrypts confirmed it. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, had authenticated the documents. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris himself had signed off on the analysis. The body, the letters, the maps, all deemed genuine. Hitler ordered the reinforcement of Greece and Sardinia. The 1st Panzer Division, previously stationed in France, was diverted south. Coastal defenses in Sicily, the real Allied target, remained skeletal. Montague had read the decrypts with quiet satisfaction. "They've swallowed it whole," he told Cholmondeley. Churchill, informed of the success, permitted himself a rare smile. "In wartime," he said, "truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." But on May 28th, a routine follow-up report arrived from an MI6 officer embedded in Madrid. It contained a single line. "German photo analysts have flagged inconsistencies in map reference 4B. Montague's stomach turned. Map reference 4B was not part of the fake invasion documents. It was a fragment, a sliver of a genuine Allied planning map that had accidentally been included in the background of one photograph. It showed troop positions near Syracuse, on Sicily, the very place they were trying to hide. The deception, so carefully built, now teetered on the edge of collapse. If the Germans investigated further, the entire operation and the lives of 160,000 Allied soldiers preparing to land on Sicilian beaches would be in jeopardy. The war room beneath Whitehall filled with urgent voices. Montague spread the Madrid intelligence report across the table. Cholmondeley leaned in, face pale. A brigadier from combined operations stood behind them, arms crossed, silent. "How much do they have?" the brigadier asked. Montague pointed to the photograph. "This corner, approximately 2 centimeters square, enough to show coastal designations, grid coordinates, possibly unit markers." The room went quiet. Then came the questions. Could the Germans correlate it? Yes, if they cross-referenced it with existing reconnaissance. They would identify the Syracuse coastline within 48 hours. Could they reverse engineer the invasion date? Possibly. Troop concentrations visible on the fragment suggested a landing between July 5th and 12th. The actual date, July 9th. How many divisions were at risk? The U.S. 7th Army under Patton, 66,000 men. The British 8th Army under Montgomery, 115,000 men. Total, 181,000 soldiers, 3,000 landing craft, 600 tanks, 240 artillery pieces, all converging on beaches the enemy might now reinforce. What were German capabilities in Sicily? 2 full divisions, the 15th Panzer Grenadier and the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. Estimated strength, 32,000 combat troops. Coastal artillery, 142 emplacements covering key landing zones. Luftwaffe aircraft stationed in Sicily and Calabria, approximately 600. If those forces were redeployed from Sardinia back to Sicily in the next 10 days, Allied casualties could exceed 40%. What was the probability the Germans would investigate further? Unknown. But Abwehr analysts were thorough, and one of them, a Major von Roeni, had a reputation for meticulous cross-checking. If von Roen examined the fragment closely, he would notice the discrepancy. And once he did, the entire deception would unravel. The fake letters would be reanalyzed. The body's dental records, fabricated, would be scrutinized. The love letters, written by an MI5 secretary, would be examined for linguistic inconsistencies. And then the Abwehr would know. They had been deceived. Hitler's fury would be absolute. Divisions would be recalled, defenses reinforced. The Sicilian coastline, which British planners had counted on being lightly defended, would become a death trap. The cost of discovery. Projected Allied casualties if Sicily was fully defended. 18,000 dead or wounded in the first 72 hours. Projected delay to the Italian campaign, 4 to 6 months. Strategic impact. Prolonged war in Europe, delayed D-Day, potential collapse of Soviet confidence in the Western Allies. One photograph, one fragment, one mistake, and the entire course of the war hung in the balance. Montague looked at the map, then at the clock. It was May 29th. The invasion fleet would sail from North Africa in 39 days. There was nothing more they could do, except wait. In Berlin, inside the labyrinthine headquarters of the Abwehr on Tirpitzufer, Major Hermann von Roene sat at his desk. Before him, the Madrid intelligence file, the photographs, the maps, the letters. He had read them 3 times. Something was wrong. Von Roene was not like other Abwehr officers. He did not trust instinct. He trusted data, cross-references, verification. And the more he studied the documents recovered from Major William Martin, the more the inconsistencies accumulated. First, the body. Spanish authorities had declared death by drowning, but the pathology report noted minimal water in the lungs. British intelligence had claimed the body had been in the water for days. Yet decomposition was minimal, and the uniform pristine, as if dressed after death. Second, the documents. The invasion plans were too explicit, too neatly organized. Military correspondence, even at the highest levels, was rarely so clear. And the maps, beautifully drafted, almost theatrically detailed. Third, the fragment. Map reference 4B. A corner of coastline, visible in one photograph. Von Roena had ordered it enlarged. His cartographers had compared it against reconnaissance imagery from the Mediterranean theater. The match was immediate. Syracuse, Sicily. Not Sardinia, not Greece. He sat back in his chair. Then he reached for another file. This one contained decoded British radio traffic, intercepts captured by listening posts in occupied France. Most of it was routine. Supply requisitions, troop movements, weather reports. But one signal, sent 3 weeks earlier, had been flagged by a junior analyst and then dismissed. It read, "Cargo delivered Huelva. Await confirmation." The date matched the discovery of the body. Von Roena's eyes narrowed. Cargo. Not officer recovered. Not casualty reported. Cargo. He opened a third file, a list of British deception operations identified since 1940. There were 12. All involved false documents, fake radio traffic, planted intelligence. He read one case in detail. Operation Bodyguard. Fake invasion plans left in a briefcase on a train in 1942. The Germans had fallen for it. Reinforcements had been sent to Norway. The real target, North Africa, had been left exposed. Von Roena closed the file. He understood now. The body was not an accident. It was a delivery. The documents were not stolen. They were gifted. The maps were not careless. They were bait. And the fragment, the one detail that contradicted everything, was not a mistake. It was a test. A test to see if German intelligence would notice. A test to see if they would abandon the obvious lie and investigate further, or if they would cling to the comfortable deception. Von Roena stood. He walked to the window. Outside, Berlin was gray, bombed, dying. He thought of the men in the field, the generals who had already redeployed, the Führer who had already given the orders. And he thought of the truth, that the Allies were not coming to Sardinia. They were coming to Sicily. And no one would believe him. He returned to his desk. He drafted a report. He marked it urgent. But even as he wrote, he knew it was too late. Why deception works and why it fails is not a matter of cleverness alone. It is a matter of systems. By 1943, the machinery of modern intelligence had grown vast. Thousands of analysts, millions of intercepted signals, photographs taken from 30,000 feet, documents smuggled from occupied capitals. But volume creates blindness, and blindness creates belief. The British understood this. They had studied German intelligence procedures for 3 years. They knew how the Abwehr processed information. They knew its biases, its tendencies, its institutional weaknesses. They knew, for instance, that German intelligence preferred sources that confirmed existing assumptions, that it valued documents over human testimony, that it trusted physical evidence, maps, letters, uniforms, over abstract analysis. And they knew that the Abwehr, like all bureaucracies, feared being wrong more than it feared being deceived. So the British built Operation Mincemeat around those weaknesses. The body was real, not a dummy. The uniform was authentic. The documents were typed on genuine War Office stationery. The signatures were forged by experts. The love letters were written in feminine handwriting on scented paper. Every detail was designed to survive scrutiny. But the fragment, the sliver of Syracuse coastline, was not an oversight. It was an anchor. A single piece of contradictory evidence, buried deep, designed to do two things. First, to test whether the Germans would investigate thoroughly. If they found it and questioned the entire operation, the British would know their deception had failed, and they would adjust. Second, to provide plausible deniability. If later the Germans discovered they had been fooled, the fragment would serve as proof that the deception had been imperfect, that they had been given clues, that their failure was not one of gullibility, but of insufficient analysis. It was a fail-safe, but it nearly became a trigger. Because in war, even perfect plans depend on human decision. And von Roena had made his decision. He submitted his report to Admiral Canaris on June 1st. It was 7 pages long. It outlined every inconsistency. It recommended immediate re-evaluation of Mediterranean defenses. Canaris read it and buried it. Not because he disagreed, but because the Wehrmacht had already committed. 2 panzer divisions were en route to Sardinia. Coastal artillery was being repositioned. Luftwaffe squadrons had been reassigned. To reverse those orders would require admitting error to Hitler, and no one admitted error to Hitler. So the report was filed, marked for further review. Forgotten. The machinery of deception had done its work, not by fooling the Germans completely, but by making the truth too costly to accept. On July 9th, 1943, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Sicily. German defenses were light, scattered, unprepared. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, which should have been dug in along the southern coast, was 200 miles away, guarding an island that would never be attacked. The invasion succeeded. But in Berlin, in a file cabinet in the Abwehr archives, a report remained, written by a man who had seen the truth and been ignored. Sicily fell in 38 days. Mussolini was deposed. Italy surrendered. The road to Rome lay open. Operation Mincemeat was hailed as one of the greatest deceptions in military history. Churchill called it the man who never was. Montagu received commendations. Cholmondeley was quietly promoted. But in the years after the war, when the archives were opened, historians discovered something unsettling. The Germans had known. Not all of them. Not officially. But enough. Von Roena's report had been filed, but it had also been read by junior officers, by skeptics within the Abwehr, by men who had long suspected that British intelligence was feeding them lies. And yet, the deception had succeeded anyway. Not because the lie was perfect, but because the institution preferred the lie to the truth. Because reversing course was more dangerous than moving forward. Because admitting deception was more humiliating than accepting loss. This is the lesson of Operation Mincemeat, that deception works not by being flawless, but by being convenient. That even when the truth is visible, systems will ignore it if the cost of acknowledgement is too high. And that wars are decided not only by what men know, but by what they are willing to believe. The fragment on the map, the sliver of Syracuse coastline, was never officially investigated. It remained in the file, unexamined, unreported, a clue that could have changed everything. But didn't. Because in war, even evidence can be invisible, and even perfect victories can be built on mistakes. Years later, Montague was asked if he had feared discovery. He paused. "Every day," he said. "But I knew something the Germans didn't." "What was that?" He smiled faintly. "That they wanted to believe us." The body washed ashore in Huelva on April 30th, 1943. The invasion began on July 9th. In between, the fate of nations balanced on a photograph, and a fragment, and the silence of men who saw the truth, but did not speak. A dim room in Berlin. June 1944. Maps spread across a long table. Cigarette smoke curls upward. German officers lean forward, faces tight with concentration. They had seen the intelligence. 30 divisions. George Patton commanding, massed along the Dover coast, ready to strike at Pas-de-Calais. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht nodded in grim agreement. The invasion would come there. It had to. 15 German divisions remained in place, dug in, waiting. But across the channel, something impossible was unfolding. They thought they had guessed correctly, but what they believed on that map would doom them all. To German reconnaissance pilots circling high above the English coast, it looked perfect. A vast army preparing for war. Sherman tanks parked in neat formations, landing craft bobbing in harbors. Tents cluster near the cliffs, supply depots stretching for miles. Even General Patton himself photographed inspecting troops, speaking at ceremonies, visible and unmistakable. This was the first U.S. Army group, FUSAC, 30 divisions strong, the most powerful invasion force ever assembled. Berlin's analysts studied every photograph, intercepted every radio transmission, calculated tonnages, troop strengths, fuel requirements. Everything pointed to one conclusion: the main Allied assault would strike Pas-de-Calais. The shortest route, the most logical target. German High Command moved accordingly. Panzer divisions held position. Infantry fortified the coast. Artillery batteries remained fixed. Barrels pointed toward the narrowest point of the channel. They were certain they were wrong. For months, German intelligence had tracked FUSAC's buildup. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence, cataloged every movement. Radio traffic confirmed divisions arriving from America. British liaison officers coordinated with Patton's staff. Supply convoys rolled day and night toward Dover. The numbers added up perfectly. General Patton, the Americans' most aggressive commander, had been given command. That alone told Berlin everything. The Allies would not waste their best general on a diversion. German reconnaissance planes captured hundreds of photographs. Analysts counted tanks, trucks, artillery pieces. The math was undeniable. 15 Wehrmacht divisions, nearly 150,000 men, remained stationed at Pas-de-Calais, even after the Normandy landings began on June 6th. German high command held firm. Normandy is a feint, they insisted. Patton will strike Calais within days. They waited. Fortifications held. Reserves stayed in place. General von Salmuth commanded the 15th Army at Calais. He studied the intelligence daily. Everything confirmed the threat. He could not abandon his position. Hitler himself believed it. Patton is the key, he told his staff. We wait for Patton. So they waited. While Eisenhower's forces carved into Normandy's beaches, the most powerful German army in France sat idle, 50 miles away, watching an empty horizon. They had interpreted every signal correctly. They had trusted their intelligence apparatus completely. They had been fooled by rubber and radio. Fusag never existed. Not a single combat-ready division. Not one real tank. Here is what the Germans saw. Inflatable Sherman tanks. Rubber shells mounted on wooden frames, inflated by pumps, moved nightly by trucks to simulate repositioning. Plywood landing craft. Painted canvas stretched over timber skeletons, floating in harbors. Photographed from altitude, indistinguishable from steel. Empty camps. Tents erected with no soldiers inside. Laundry hung on lines. Smoke from fake cook fires. Radio deception. Operators transmitted fake orders, supply requests, casualty reports. Entire phantom regiments communicated on German-monitored frequencies. False airfields. Dummy aircraft lined runways. Made from scrap wood and fabric. German reconnaissance photographed them, counted them, reported them to Berlin. George Patton, real, visible, photographed at Fusag headquarters, seen inspecting non-existent troops. His presence alone validated the illusion. The operation required precision, timing, obsessive detail. The Anleis employed Hollywood set designers, engineers, magicians. Artists painted shadows onto plywood planes so aerial photos showed depth. Sound engineers broadcast fake engine noise near coastlines. The numbers were calculated. 12 inflatable tanks, Churchill 1 armored battalion to German photo analysts. 150 radio operators, 30 divisions worth of communications traffic. 20 wooden landing craft, an invasion fleet capable of transporting 50,000 men. Every element reinforced the others. If a reconnaissance plane photographed tanks at Dover, radio traffic confirmed a tank regiment stationed there. If signals intelligence detected Patton's command post, visual surveillance found the headquarters building. The Germans trusted their intelligence systems. They had no reason not to. They intercepted radio messages ordering fuel for tank columns that did not exist. They photographed supply depots filled with crates, empty crates stacked for appearance. Abwehr agents in Britain, many of them doubled by MI5, sent reports confirming Fusag's strength. These spies, now working for the Allies, fed Berlin exactly what Operation Fortitude needed them to believe. The illusion held because German reconnaissance flights were limited, high altitude only, details obscured. Radio intercepts matched visual intelligence, no contradictions. Patton's reputation made Fusag credible. No one believed the Allies would waste him. Confirmation bias. Berlin expected an assault at Calais. Every piece of intelligence fit that expectation. The deception was so thorough that even after D-Day, German commanders refused to commit reserves to Normandy. Patton has not moved, intelligence officers reported. Fusag remains at Dover. For 7 critical weeks after June 6th, 15 German divisions stayed frozen at Pas de Calais. waiting for an army that was never coming, watching for ships that were made of plywood, preparing for an invasion that existed only in their own reports. A German command post, July 1944. Officers stare at maps marked with red pins. The truth settling in the realization came slowly, then all at once. By mid-July, Allied forces had broken out from Normandy. Patton, the real Patton, was commanding the Third Army, not at Dover, not at Calais, in France, leading the American advance through Brittany, toward the Seine. At 15th Army headquarters, staff officers stared at intelligence updates. The pieces no longer fit. If Patton was in France, then who commanded Fusag? Reconnaissance was ordered. New flights, closer inspection. What they found, or rather, what they did not find, was devastating. The Dover encampments were empty. Tents collapsed. No vehicle tracks. No supply movement. The tanks photographed weeks earlier had vanished. Not redeployed. Simply gone. Radio traffic from Fusag had ceased. The frequencies that once crackled with orders and logistics reports were silent. One German intelligence officer later recalled the moment. We checked the reports again, cross-referenced every source, and then we understood. We had been watching phantoms. General von Salmuth faced an impossible truth. For 2 months, his entire army had guarded against an invasion that was never planned. While the real battle raged 50 miles west, he had kept 15 divisions idle, 150,000 men, 700 tanks, thousands of artillery pieces, all waiting for ghosts. The scale of the deception became clear. Fusag had existed in intelligence reports only, never on the ground. Every radio transmission was scripted, every sighting staged. Patton's presence at Dover had been carefully orchestrated, public enough to be observed, brief enough to seem plausible. German double agents had fed false information for months, validated by other doubled agents. A closed loop of lies. Hitler had believed it. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht had believed it. Field commanders had staked entire strategies on it. And it had never been real. In Berlin, officers reviewed the deception timeline. The craftsmanship was undeniable. The Allies had understood German intelligence procedures perfectly. They knew what would be photographed, what would be intercepted, what would be believed. They had fed Germany exactly what it expected to see. One staff officer wrote in his diary, "They did not defeat our intelligence. They made it defeat itself." The consequences were immediate. By the time reserves finally moved toward Normandy, the Allies had established an unbreakable foothold. The delay had been fatal. 7 weeks. That was the cost of believing in Fusag. 7 weeks in which German armor sat motionless at Calais while Normandy burned. General von Salmuth understood what had happened. So did his staff. So did Berlin. They had been outmaneuvered not by firepower, but by imagination, by plywood and radio waves, by the careful manipulation of their own assumptions. The invasion at Pas-de-Calais was never coming. Patton had never commanded Fusag. The army they feared most had been made of air. Not might have been lost, was lost. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it understood how intelligence fails. The Allies did not simply create a fake army. They built an entire system designed to exploit German decision-making. Here's how it worked. First, the visual layer. Dummy equipment was not placed randomly. It followed real military doctrine. Tank formations matched German training manuals. Supply depots were positioned where actual logistics would require them. airfields aligned with bomber range calculations. German photo analysts saw what they expected, an army preparing for invasion. Second, the signals layer. Radio operators transmitted thousands of hours of fake traffic, but not random chatter. Scripted communications followed military protocol exactly. Call signs, encryption patterns, message timing, all replicated authentic U.S. Army procedures. German signals intelligence intercepted what it expected. Command structures coordinating an invasion. Third, the human layer. Double agents, German spies turned by British intelligence, reported Fusagi's buildup. These agents had established credibility over years. Their reports matched visual and signals intelligence. The Abwehr trusted what it expected, confirmation from multiple independent sources. Fourth, the psychological layer. General Patton's assignment to Fusag was the keystone. The Germans believed, correctly, that Patton was America's most aggressive commander. The Allies would not waste him on a diversion. Therefore, Fusag must be real. And if Fusag was real, the main invasion would strike Calais. The logic was flawless. The premise was false. Why did German intelligence fail? Not from incompetence, from structure. The Abwehr had built systems to detect deception, cross-reference sources, verify information. But those systems assumed adversaries would make mistakes, leave contradictions, fail to maintain consistency. The Allies made no mistakes. Every visual element matched every radio transmission, every agent report aligned with every reconnaissance photograph. The deception had no seams. German analysts, trained to spot inconsistencies, found none. So they concluded the intelligence was accurate. The industrial logic was equally devastating. Building an invasion force at Dover made strategic sense. It was the shortest channel crossing. Patton commanding that force made command sense. He was the best available general. Holding reserves at Calais made tactical sense. It was the most threatened point. Every decision was rational. Every conclusion followed from solid premises. The premises were manufactured. The hidden mechanism was expectation. Germany expected the invasion at Calais. Every intelligence report confirmed that expectation. So the expectation hardened into certainty. When Normandy was attacked, German commanders did not abandon their certainty. They reinterpreted events to fit existing beliefs. Normandy is a feint. Patton will still strike Calais. Confirmation bias became a strategic weapon. The Allies did not fight German intelligence. They fed it. They nourished it. They made it strong enough to blind its own commanders. By July, when the truth emerged, the war had already shifted. The Normandy beachhead was secure. Allied armor was racing inland. German reserves arrived too late, too dispersed, too exhausted. Operation Fortitude had bought 7 weeks. In those weeks, the outcome of the war changed. Not through firepower, through illusion, through understanding that the most dangerous intelligence is intelligence that confirms what you already believe. After the war, Allied intelligence officers interviewed their German counterparts. They wanted to know, when did you realize? Most answered the same way. Too late. The cost of Operation Fortitude cannot be measured only in divisions held at Calais. It must be measured in time. Time to fortify Normandy beaches, lost. Time to reposition armor, lost. Time to coordinate counterattacks, lost. 7 weeks. In modern war, 7 weeks is an eternity. By the time German reserves reached Normandy, The Allies controlled 50 miles of coastline. Supply lines ran unbroken from England. Reinforcements poured ashore daily. The moment for a decisive German counterstrike had passed. It had passed while 15 divisions watched an empty horizon at Calais. The lesson was clear. In war, perfect intelligence means nothing if the intelligence itself is false. The Germans had done everything correctly. They had cross-referenced sources, verified data, applied rigorous analysis, and they had been deceived completely. Because the Allies had not attacked German intelligence. They had become it. They had spoken its language, followed its procedures, anticipated its conclusions. They had built a lie so consistent, so detailed, so perfectly aligned with German expectations, that it became indistinguishable from truth. One Allied officer later reflected, "We did not fool Germany. We helped Germany fool itself." Operation Fortitude was never mentioned in victory speeches. No medals were awarded for inflating rubber tanks. The officers who scripted fake radio transmissions received no parades. But historians now understand, fortitude was as critical as any battle. It won 7 weeks, and those 7 weeks won France. The Phantom Army never fired a shot. It never crossed the Channel. It never existed outside German intelligence reports. And yet, it helped decide the war. The final truth is simple. In 1944, the most powerful German army in France was defeated by plywood, radio waves, and the careful manipulation of belief. They thought they knew where the enemy would strike. They were certain. They were vigilant. They were prepared. And because they were so certain, they lost. In war, even perfect preparation can seal your defeat.